Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. If you take a look at the percentage of murder cases that go unsolved in the US and Canada every year, it would seem to suggest that these crimes are hard enough to solve even when authorities know the exact nature of the crime they're dealing with. But in cases of unexplained deaths, investigators have to deal with constant uncertainty, often leading to multiple theories and competing narratives within a single case. In the most extreme examples, these disputes are never reconciled, leaving the deceased person's family, friends, and the public at large to endlessly speculate about what might have happened to them. Today, we wanted to take a look at a few examples of these kinds of cases. Mysterious stories where there are multiple viable theories about how a person died, and their death remains the subject of controversy. Before we get to our list, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a bunch of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, make sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. As always, we are extremely grateful to everyone who has helped support the channel. With that out of the way, here are 4 controversial cases of unexplained death.
On the morning of April 15, 1994, 2 surfers walking on the beach near the Sunset Cliffs National Park came across a disturbing scene. They discovered the lifeless, nude body of a young woman floating face down in some kelp. She seemed to have experienced an unthinkable trauma. An autopsy conducted shortly after the discovery confirmed the gruesome findings. The young woman was missing her right leg from the thigh down, the result of what were described as large tearing-type wounds. She had also suffered a broken neck, several broken ribs, a broken pelvis, and had various scrapes and bruises on her face and torso. Most strangely of all, there were large quantities of sand found in her mouth, lungs, throat, and stomach. The young woman was soon identified as Michelle Von Emster, a 25-year-old art store clerk who had gone missing in San Diego the previous evening. That night, she had planned to attend a Pink Floyd concert with her friend Coco Campbell, but when the pair arrived, they realized that they had purchased the wrong tickets. On the way back to their house in Ocean Beach, Michelle had reportedly asked to be dropped off at the pier a few blocks away from where they had lived. According to those who knew her, this was not unusual for Michelle. She had an intense love of the ocean and spent a lot of time in and around the water. It was this love of the ocean that investigators would ultimately claim led to Michelle's death, after 2 different medical examiners declared that she had died as a result of a shark attack. The theory was that Michelle had gone swimming nude sometime after being dropped off at the pier on the night of her death and had been attacked while out in the ocean. It was determined that the most significant injury to her leg was caused by a great white, the only shark of significant enough size to inflict such an injury. After that, Michelle's body had been scavenged by smaller blue sharks until it was discovered the following morning. Though this remains the official explanation in Michelle's death to this day, there are many who believe that the facts of the case do not support this narrative. For starters, the water was reportedly 59 degrees Fahrenheit on the night Michelle died, hardly the kind of weather that most people would have wanted to go swimming in. Michelle's clothes were also never recovered, shedding doubt on the theory that she took them off before getting into the water willingly. Complicating matters further was the fact that Michelle's purse was found on a stretch of beach that was more than 2 miles away from where her body was discovered. It appeared that none of its contents were missing. However, by far the biggest point of contention in the case was the expertise of the medical examiners themselves. Neither of the people who examined Michelle's body had ever dealt with shark attack cases before, leading some people to challenge their findings. In particular, shark expert Ralph Collier noted that when a great white bites off part of a limb, the break is clean. This is inconsistent with the injuries to Michelle's right leg, which appeared to be from multiple cutting events. Additionally, the amount of sand in Michelle's stomach and lungs did not seem to be consistent with a shark attack. The damage to her leg likely would have meant that she bled out quickly and been unable to gasp for air. The thought of a shark dragging her to the bottom of the ocean in order for sand to end up in these places seemed unlikely to those familiar with such attacks. Without being cast on the official explanation of the case, several alternative theories emerged, exploring every possibility from suicide to accidents to foul play. The suicide and accidental death theories mostly focused on Michelle going into the water willingly on the night she had died. However, rather than a shark attack, in these explanations it was theorized that Michelle had either been struck repeatedly by a boat propeller or that she had jumped to her own death from the cliffs above the ocean. The foul play theory of the case, meanwhile, focused on 2 different suspects. One was a man who had a brief romantic encounter with Michelle 2 nights before her death, and the other was a mysterious man on a motorcycle who had reportedly stalked Michelle at her former job at an office supply store. The first suspect, a work acquaintance named Edwin Decker, admitted to police that he had been in contact with Michelle on the day of her death. He also wrote a bizarre, morbid poem after her death that many viewed as an indication that he could have been involved in her death. However, no evidence was ever produced of Decker's involvement in the case, and he has since pushed for the investigation into Michelle's death to be reopened. The second suspect, the mysterious man on the motorcycle, likewise has little tying him to the case. It was reported that Michelle quit her job at the office supply store to avoid the man, and that following her death, a strange person came into the location and made several copies of Michelle's autopsy report. It is believed that this is the same person who stalked Michelle, but it has never been confirmed. The identity of the so-called stalker remains a mystery. After almost 3 decades, it's not hard to understand why so many people continue to be drawn to the Michelle von Emster case. The official explanation doesn't quite seem to add up, but the litany of alternative theories that have cropped up over the years have their own problems and also lack hard evidence. It remains to be seen if we will ever get any satisfying answers in this truly tragic and mysterious case.
Up until her death in February of 2005, Gita Angara's life was an inspiring American success story. She had emigrated to the United States from India in 1984, after graduating as the top student in her class at Loyola College in Chennai, the first woman in the school's history to earn a bachelor's and a master's degree in chemistry. When she arrived in the US, she continued to excel in the sciences, earning additional master's degrees and a doctorate in organic chemistry from New York University. Gita married another Indian expat, and the couple eventually settled down in the city of Clifton, New Jersey. It was here that she would take a job at the Passaic Valley Water Commission in 1992, a treatment facility that provided water to 800,000 people in northern New Jersey communities. Though Gita considered leaving her job over the years, she eventually decided against it after being promoted in 2004. In addition to being named the treatment facility's senior chemist and earning a plant operator's license, she was tasked with overseeing its transformation into a more modern facility. This involved gradually shifting away from chlorination as a way of cleaning the water to a new ozone disinfection system. Her husband and co-workers would later say that Gita was excited about the project. She took her job extremely seriously and was proud of her work. However, there were those who were less enthusiastic about Gita's success. She told several people close to her that some of her co-workers became openly resentful after the promotion, believing she did not deserve it. Others were angry about the changes she was making to the water treatment system, believing that it was a mistake to switch from chlorine to ozone. Tensions reportedly reached their height after a pinkish substance was discovered in the treated water in late January of 2005, during a week when Gita was off from work due to an illness. When she returned, she had been asked to retrain co-workers on details of the new system, which only escalated feelings of anger amongst those who already disliked her. Then, on the morning of February 8th, Gita vanished. The day had started as an uneventful one. Gita had arrived at the treatment facility at 7:30 a.m., working for just over 2 hours before having breakfast with a couple of co-workers. At some point during this time, she was informed that filtering machines needed to be calibrated in the plant's basement. She was last seen around 10:30 a.m. that morning, heading down to the lower level with a clipboard, a glass beaker, and a two-way radio. Almost 12 hours passed before an employee on the night shift at the treatment facility realized that something might be wrong. While there was no sign of Gita anywhere at the plant, it seemed as though she had never left. Her coat was still in her office, and a sandwich had been left sitting on her desk, as though she planned to come right back. Even more alarming, her car was still in the parking lot. After that, several employees who had left for the day came back to search for Gita. At least one of those employees searched the basement of the facility where Gita had last been seen that morning. This lower level consisted of a series of tunnels, sitting atop 35-foot deep interconnected water tanks that comprised various stages of the water purification process. The lids to these tanks were 4-foot rectangular metal plates and were the only means of accessing the tanks directly. Each one was set into the concrete floor and weighed about 50 pounds. It was roughly a 5-foot drop to the water below, and there were no ladders mounted inside to access the panel from the waterline. Investigators would later learn that earlier that day, an employee discovered some broken glass in one of the tunnels near a metal access panel that was slightly askew. Thinking nothing of it, they swept up the glass and threw it in the garbage. By midnight, employees had contacted Gita's family, informing them that their search had come up empty. They had also been unable to reach Gita since she had left for work that morning, and had become concerned after she failed to show up in the afternoon to drive her daughter to a basketball game. After that, the police were called, and Gita was officially reported missing. After a follow-up search from emergency service workers at the facility also came up empty, it was decided that there was only one place left to look: the water tanks themselves. Police divers first searched the tank that had been found slightly open when Gita first disappeared, and discovered remnants of the broken beaker she had been carrying, as well as her radio. The search continued until Gita's body was found in a different connected tank, roughly 30 hours after she had first gone missing. The grim discovery immediately prompted speculation. Had Gita simply fallen into the tank accidentally due to an open panel? Or was there something more sinister at play? An autopsy initially seemed to provide the answers. Gita had been alive at the time that she went into the water, and her cause of death had been drowning. Pathologists also discovered bruises on her neck, waist, and elbows, suggesting that she may have been strangled before her death, or at the very least involved in a struggle. However, due to the time her body had spent in the water, there was little in the way of trace evidence to be found. No DNA and no fingerprints were discovered. Less than a week after Gita's death, it was announced that the case would be investigated as a homicide. In addition to the details provided by the autopsy, investigators felt that it was unlikely that Gita could have fallen into the water tank, given how little the lid had been opened at the time of the discovery. Almost immediately, suspicion turned to the employees of the facility, after it was determined that the water treatment plant was well secured and fenced off, and it would have been difficult for a non-employee to gain access. Special attention was paid to employees who were known to dislike Gita, or who may have had a motive to want her dead. Of the 50 employees who had been at work on the day that Gita went missing, investigators eventually whittled the list of suspects down to a group of 3 people. However, this is ultimately where the case hit a dead end. Though police claimed that at least one of the suspects was close to a confession, all 3 of them eventually hired lawyers, and the leads amounted to nothing. There were no cameras in the basement of the water treatment plant, and this, combined with a lack of physical evidence, made proving a suspect's involvement nearly impossible. As the case went cold, investigators started to pursue alternative theories. The more bizarre of these theories was that Gita's death was linked to another unsolved case in Passaic County dating back to 1968, when a 22-year-old secretary working at the Hoffman LaRoche plant was found dead in a hallway. The victim, Joanne Freeman, had been attacked from behind with a wooden mallet, and her throat had been cut. Similar to the Gita Angara case, the Hoffman LaRoche plant was fenced off and secure, leading to speculation that an employee was the culprit. Also like Gita, in Joanne's case, investigators had struggled to find a motive. The case had remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades, and some thought the similarities between the cases were too large to ignore. Perhaps they were looking for the same culprit in both cases. However, the idea never managed to bring forth any solid leads. The more compelling alternative theory of the case was actually one that had been proposed early on: that Gita's death was accidental. In 2006, investigators contacted Scottish forensic pathologist Derek Pounder. Pounder was one of the few experts who specialized in drownings that occur in cold water. Pounder's research showed that the bruising patterns in the Gita Angara case were consistent with injuries in a small percentage of other cold water drowning cases, which sometimes mimicked the signs of a strangulation. The tank Gita was found in was apparently more than cold enough to produce these bruises, as the water was kept just above freezing. Unfortunately, Pounder was never able to examine Gita's body directly, as it had been cremated shortly after her death due to her Hindu religious beliefs. Still, the cold water drowning theory was enough to convince some people involved in the investigation that an accidental death was possible or even likely. This included the former lead detective on the case, Lieutenant Jim Wood, who who had worked on the investigation for 18 months before he retired. Wood later said that he believed that someone had removed the access plate fully on the morning Gita disappeared, and that she had indeed fallen in. Not realizing what had happened, perhaps someone had hastily replaced it later on. This seemed to track with an account from an unnamed plant employee who told the New York Post that on the day of Gita's death, the state had ordered water testing as a result of the pinkish discoloration that had occurred the week she was out sick. According to the employee, they still did these tests at the time by removing the plate and testing the water directly. It has been more than 16 years since Gita's death, but it appears that the investigation will not be putting this mystery to bed anytime soon. Both the foul play and accidental death theories seem to have substantial weight behind them, but no clear evidence has emerged to definitively solve the case.
On the morning of December 4th, 2003, a man named Daniel Gaiman arrived at his job at the Sensing and Weaver Drilling Company in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The business was located in the heart of Lancaster's Amish country, a rural area that was not well traveled even by locals. After parking his truck, Gaiman noticed something strange in the woods off the side of a nearby two-lane road. When he and a coworker went to investigate, they saw a silver four-door Honda Accord down in the creek. Even more bizarre, the car appeared to be idling, but there was no sign of a driver. However, when Gaiman noticed blood in the front seat of the vehicle, his intrigue turned to concern, and he called the police. When investigators arrived on the scene, the disturbing findings only continued. There was blood on the driver's door, the fender of the car, and another large pool of blood that had seeped through the front seat and into the floor in the back of the vehicle. There was also roughly $200 worth of cash scattered around. It didn't take long to locate the driver, a man wearing a suit, tie, and overcoat, who was lying face down in the creek. The man would later be identified as 38-year-old Jonathan Luna, a married father of two and an assistant United States attorney in Baltimore, Maryland. It quickly became obvious where the blood in the vehicle had come from. Jonathan had numerous stab wounds across his body. An autopsy revealed that Jonathan had suffered 36 stab wounds in all, more than half of which were located on his neck. Most of the injuries were shallow, but one had punctured his left carotid artery and would have caused him to bleed out within minutes. The wounds had been inflicted with his own pocket knife. Still, his actual cause of death appeared to be drowning. The case was ruled a homicide. However, as investigators worked to piece together the final hours of Jonathan's life, his death only became stranger. It appeared that the previous day had started out like any other for the young lawyer. He had left his home in Elkridge and made the 14-mile journey to his office in Baltimore. Like many days, Jonathan had worked late. He was in the middle of an important drug case which was supposed to be presented to a judge the following morning. Shortly after 9 p.m. that night, Jonathan left a voicemail for one of the defense lawyers in the case, saying that he had worked on a plea deal they were negotiating, but that he had to head home. According to reports, though, he didn't leave the Baltimore courthouse until after 11:30 p.m., and when he got into his car, he did not head home. Instead, Jonathan headed northeast on I-95. He used his E-ZPass while driving into Delaware, but after 3 toll interchanges, for some reason, he began buying the toll tickets instead. At 12:57 a.m., $200 was withdrawn from Jonathan's bank account from an ATM at the JFK Plaza Service Center near Newark, Delaware. Roughly 2 hours later, he crossed the Delaware River toll bridge to the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and at 3:20 a.m., his debit card was used again to buy gas at the Sunoco King of Prussia Service Center. At 4:04 a.m., Jonathan's car exited the turnpike at the Reading-Lancaster interchange. This toll ticket was later found with blood on it, suggesting that Jonathan was injured at the time that he made the payment. It is believed that his car was then parked at the Sensing and Weaver Drilling Company before it was driven into a creek shortly before employees arrived at 5 a.m. Though the case was officially declared a homicide, it didn't take long for many involved in the investigation to suggest that Jonathan's death could very well have been a suicide. The fact that many of his stab wounds were shallow and that they had been made with his own pocket knife lent credence to the idea that they were self-inflicted. Those who believed the suicide explanation argued that the shallow wounds were hesitation cuts, a common injury associated with suicide cases. There was also disagreement about the perceived lack of defensive wounds on Jonathan's body. Those who believed that the case was a homicide argued that there were wounds to Jonathan's hands, as well as fingernail marks near his wrists that were indicative of a struggle. Proponents of the suicide theory disagreed, saying these wounds also appeared to be self-inflicted. However, the debate over the physical evidence wasn't the only area where the two narratives diverged. Those who believed that Jonathan was murdered suggested that it may have been as a result of one of the cases he was prosecuting. As an assistant U.S. attorney, he had put more than his fair share of criminals away, leaving no shortage of people who may have wanted him dead. Conversely, those that believed his case was a suicide pointed to a series of problems in Jonathan's personal life. According to colleagues, Jonathan had been struggling at work. It was well known that he and his boss, U.S. Attorney Thomas DiBaggio, did not like each other, and that DiBaggio had been openly hostile towards Jonathan before his death. Jonathan had also been a suspect in the disappearance of $36,000 in cash that had been evidence in part of a trial that he had worked on. The cash had gone missing sometime after being brought to the federal courthouse, and many employees had already been questioned about its disappearance. Rumors began to circulate that Jonathan had substantial credit card debt that his wife did not know about and may have stolen the money as a result. At the time of Jonathan's death, he had an upcoming polygraph test to answer questions about the missing money. After more than 17 years, Jonathan Luna's death remains the subject of serious debate. The case is still officially a homicide, but federal investigators believe he committed suicide. Neither theory has been definitively proven. The latest news in the case came at the beginning of 2020, when Jonathan's coroner records were located in Lancaster County, after it was previously thought that they were in federal custody. Since then, there has been a strong appeal for those records to be released to the public to see what, if any, additional information we may not know. As of July 2020, a judge was privately looking at the records to determine if their release would jeopardize the investigation. Hopefully, we'll soon get some further updates in this mysterious case.
On the afternoon of August 23, 2010, police in London went to conduct a welfare check at the apartment of 31-year-old Gareth Williams. The Welsh mathematician lived alone in the upscale residential area of Pimlico, and family and colleagues had recently become concerned when they had failed to hear from him for several days. When police entered Gareth's apartment, they made a discovery that was equal parts mysterious and shocking. His decomposing, nude body was found in a red North Face branded duffel bag, located in the bathtub of the main bedroom's ensuite bathroom. Even stranger, the bag had been padlocked from the outside. A key to the padlock was inside the bag with Gareth's remains. As police investigated the scene, more bizarre details emerged. Though it was a warm August day, the heat in Gareth's apartment had been turned up to full blast. Authorities speculated that this could have been done in an attempt to accelerate the decomposition of his body. Indeed, the state in which Gareth's remains were discovered significantly complicated the investigation. It was estimated that he had likely died 7 to 10 days prior to being found, and this, combined with the temperature of the apartment, had destroyed vital evidence. By the time a post-mortem examination was done, it could no longer be determined whether Gareth had been drugged or poisoned prior to his death. On top of this, investigators found suspiciously little DNA or fingerprint evidence at the scene. No fingerprints or traces of Gareth's DNA were recovered from the rim of the bathtub, the zipper of the duffel bag, or the padlock. Trace amounts of other DNA and fingerprints belonging to two different individuals were found on the bag and the padlock, but ultimately failed to yield complete DNA profiles. Gareth's laptop, cell phone, and other personal items were also found neatly laid out on a table in the living room. To many, it appeared that the scene had been staged, and may have been heavily wiped of evidence prior to its discovery. As if these details weren't strange enough, there was also the mysterious nature of Gareth's work to consider. For nearly a decade, he had been a codebreaker for the intelligence and security organization known as the Government Communications Headquarters. From there, he had been assigned to MI6, and in the months before his death, had reportedly been working closely with the United States National Security Agency. Suffice it to say, the intelligence agencies were not exactly forthcoming about the details of Gareth's work leading up to his death. However, thanks to investigative journalism, it would eventually be reported that some of this work was focused on Russia. More specifically, that Gareth had been helping the NSA to trace international money laundering routes used by organized crime groups, including Moscow-based mafia cells. To many, the abundance of suspicious details in the case seemed to be an obvious indication of foul play. On the more conspiratorial end, there were fears that Gareth had been killed due to his work in intelligence. Other theories posited that the crime may have been more personal in nature. However, it wouldn't take long for a second narrative to emerge in the case. Rather than foul play or a conspiracy, London's Metropolitan Police began to suggest in December of 2010 that the death may have been a tragic accident. As evidence, they released details of Gareth's internet history, showing that he had been known to visit bondage websites. It was suggested that the entire incident could have been the result of him attempting to act out a dangerous fantasy, and that he had suffocated in the process. This may have explained why there were no obvious injuries to Gareth's body, nor any sign of a struggle. He had gotten into the duffel bag of his own free will. Understandably, this failed to alleviate speculation in the case, and a coroner's inquest was ordered in March of 2012. At the inquest, the lawyer for Gareth's family reiterated the many mysterious facts of the case, particularly the lack of fingerprint or DNA evidence belonging to Gareth discovered on the duffel bag and the bathtub, as well as the fact that the bag was locked from the outside. 2 experts brought in to examine the bag said that they were unable to replicate the conditions under which Gareth's body had been found, despite trying to lock themselves in a similar bag in excess of 400 times. However, one of the experts did say they thought the feat was technically possible. This was eventually proven when British media agency South West News Service created a video showing someone zipping and locking themselves into a duffel bag, though the test failed to explain the lack of DNA or fingerprint evidence in Gareth's case. Evidence bolstering the accidental death explanation was also presented at the inquest. Gareth's former landlady described an incident in which she and her husband had been awoken by his calls for help after he had tied himself to his bed but was unable to free himself. She further testified that Gareth had claimed that he had wanted to see if he could escape and had promised not to attempt it again. The last major revelation from the inquest was the degree to which the London Metropolitan Police had been hampered by the intelligence agencies during their investigation. Detective Chief Inspector Jackie Seebeyer discussed the difficulties involved due to her team not being allowed direct access to sensitive witnesses or evidence, including Gareth's colleagues at MI6. Instead, security-cleared officers from counterterrorism acted as intermediates during the investigation. Additionally, police had not even been made aware of some of the evidence, including 9 memory sticks and a black bag found at Gareth's office, which the police only found out about during the inquest itself. It was also learned that Gareth's colleagues had waited a significant amount of time before informing the police that he was missing, despite the fact that he hadn't appeared at work for several days. It was only after Gareth's sister contacted government communications headquarters that they contacted the police, and even then, there was a 5-hour delay before they officially made the report. After all of the evidence had been heard, Coroner Fiona Wilcox concluded that Gareth's death was, quote, unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated, but due to insufficient evidence, did not go so far as to declare the death an unlawful killing. The intelligence agencies were also highly criticized in her findings, with Wilcox saying that their delays in reporting and failure to properly share information had significantly jeopardized the investigation and led to losses of vital evidence. The coroner's inquest caused a significant public backlash against the British intelligence agencies, prompting a reinvestigation of Gareth Williams' death by Metropolitan Police. The new investigation lasted a further 12 months, and this time police were allowed unprecedented access to MI6 staff. However, the Metropolitan Police ultimately concluded that the accidental death scenario was the most likely explanation for Gareth's death, and the case was closed. In the years since, the death of Gareth Williams has continued to generate controversy. In particular, there have been a growing number of reports about other suspicious deaths in Britain linked to Russian state agents or organized criminals. In 2015, a former KGB agent who defected to the UK stated that sources in Russia had claimed that the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service was responsible for Gareth's murder. According to the source, the Foreign Intelligence Service had tried and failed to blackmail Gareth into becoming a double agent. However, none of this information has been verified, making it yet another speculative layer in a case already littered with unanswered questions. Most recently in 2021, it was reported that a single hair found on Gareth's hand might hold vital clues about his death. Investigators had long known that the hair did not belong to Gareth, but had been unable to extract the DNA profile from the sample. However, a leading forensic scientist, Professor Angela Gallup, announced that with recent advances in technology, this testing could likely be completed. Metropolitan Police have so far said that they have no plans to review the case. Hopefully, they will reconsider sometime in the near future, and we might finally get some definitive answers in this truly bizarre mystery. That brings us to the end of our list. Do you know of any other cases like this that you'd like to see featured in a future video? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. Thank you for watching.